It is July 2nd, 2025, and the U.S. is bringing some of its weapons and ammunition shipments to Ukraine to a screeching halt, not because they want to see an end to the war against Russia, but because the U.S. is struggling with its own weapons stockpiles. And it seems as though Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is just now figuring that out. We knew we were in a bad spot under the Biden administration. How much worse has it gotten since then? Well, that may never be fully revealed. But at this point, this also comes as you have French President Emmanuel Macron picking up the phone and having a call with Russian President Putin for the first time in nearly 3 years. All of this as Russia is continuing on with its increased missile and drone attacks, and it's also continuing to make significant advances on the battlefield that are not just about taking territory, but about wearing down Kiev's forces, and therefore all of the NATO alliance with it. So what does this mean for the ongoing conflict and for where it's headed? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Andrei Martyanov, a veteran, author, and Russian military expert. Andrei, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
My pleasure, always.
Always good to have you. Now, I actually want to start off with the latest coming out of the US because we have the White House confirming that the US has cut off some planned shipments of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine, claiming that they suddenly want to put Americans' interest first. Now, this, of course, comes after Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered a review of US stockpiles and discovered that things aren't exactly looking too great. So, starting out with Washington's support of Kiev, how do you view the state of it? And is this move of kind of halting support, or at least weapons-wise, is that telling us something about where the U.S. stands?
Funny that you ask it, because my today's video, which is coming up pretty shortly after what we've done here, is precisely about it. And I will repeat only, any military in the world, any, and essentially when it's obviously integrated in the whole system of the government and, the state power, how you write your doctrines and things like that, every single serious military in the world has this term, which is called untouchable storage. That means that you cannot below those levels of whatever you have. Because once you go below those levels, you are in the, it's essentially a threat to the national security, and a big one. And some people who do that, unless it is some extraordinary circumstances, they will be actually court-martialed, or if they are civilians, they will be, in court and will be, convicted of many things, which are really nasty. Just to give you an example, even on the level of the ship, depending on the type of the ship, if you go to sea, there are some things which you cannot below unless it is something absolutely incredible circumstances. In terms of fuel, for example, on my ships which I served, you couldn't go below the 30% of the fuel of the tank. You couldn't go below. You couldn't completely, empty your magazines in the shells. So you always have to have things which you cannot below. And it also applies to the level of the nation states and their, defense policies. But, and I was on record for years now that once there are talks between Russia and Ukraine have been sabotaged by the United States and Great Britain in April 2022 in Istanbul, this special military operation became not just about Russia and Ukraine. It became about the militarization of whole NATO, combined West. And already during Biden administration, it was very clear they were running on empty. They were continuing to provide things which many people, even in Biden administration, were beginning to voice their concern that we are getting those, below those levels. Right now, on some positions, I think United States armed forces are just a hollow force, especially U.S. Army, which have been pretty much hollowed out, from air defense system as ineffective as they are. But yeah, they moved pretty much everything they could once their first round of supply of Ukraine by the former Warsaw Pact countries was done, gathering all that, old Soviet equipment. Then when the United States started and Europe, well, guess what? Today, the so-called armed forces of Ukraine, it is NATO army. It is practically completely, with the exception of the smaller arms, equipped with the NATO weapons, platforms, what have you. And NATO has been demilitarized. That is why Macron called Putin.
Yeah, that's I was going to ask you about that too, because I thought it was interesting that all of a sudden they had this phone call for the first time in nearly 3 years, and we're all kind of watching it going, oh, okay, interesting here. And I'm glad that you bring that up, because it's also notable when you look, and I know we've been saying this for years now, the US is in this place where they already were not prepared for war, and yet they pick a proxy war against Russia. They're heavily involved in a variety of regional wars in the Middle East through Israel, including war with Iran, even though there's a ceasefire right now. And then they're trying to pick a war with China. And it's like, okay, none of this makes any sense. All of this is going to be more harmful for the US in the long run than it is for any of these countries it's trying to target. They should have learned that from Russia. So how do you view the position that someone like Pete Hegseth is in right now, where he's just kind of going with what the US establishment wants, even though it's going to end up being incredibly detrimental to our country and to our armed forces?
Well, Pete Hegseth is primarily technical guy. He is kind of avatar in many respects. Nothing personal against him per se, but he is not. He didn't approach this thing from the position where he had the ability. But then again, in the U.S. military, it absolutely means nothing. So he approached it from the position of the high-level staff officer, which otherwise would require. But yeah, he gets some tactical, maybe some operational issues. But other than that, so in this respect, all this is written by the U.S. establishment, and it was written since 1971. Many people forget. United States couldn't afford war in Vietnam, for crying out loud. That is why Nixon jumped the golden standard. That's why United States couldn't finance it anymore. And believe me, that United States of 1971, it was an industrial giant. Okay, it was the country with the huge economic muscle. Now, United States compared to that United States of 1971, when you adjust it, it's basically bubble, hot air balloon essentially. It's pretty much hollow. And but those people who wrote them, those so-called strategists, and United States doesn't have strategy as the craft. They were proceeding from all those delusional ideas that the United States could fight first 2 middle, intensity conflicts simultaneously, then 1.5, then 1. United States cannot fight the real war, period. I mean, it's just simple as that. And I'm talking about the period against people who actually managed to shoot back. So, and of course, this delusion with the Gulf War, and which is like, oh, good Lord. I mean, it's just so, and it's nauseating, really. I mean, and so it's like the MMA fighter suddenly gets into the sandbox and beats the crap out of the 5-year-old kid. I was like, oh yeah, I'm so good. So it's just like ridiculous. And so, but now this reality, and yeah, it's United States got demilitarized, and U.S. military-industrial complex, which was always about making money, not making good weapons. U.S. weapons generally are not that good. Some of them are good, but primarily, especially ground forces, it's not even serious. It is the TOE, Table of Organization and Equipment, which is stuck in 1990. And for some reason, they think that they could fight the war of 2025. As Iran demonstrated, well, good luck.
Yeah, that's the crazy part to me too, is you're kind of watching this play out. And we saw this in Yemen too, right? With the Houthis, where the US is acting like we accomplished something. It's like, okay, how many hundreds of millions of dollars did you waste shooting at them to essentially accomplish nothing, and then claim that they capitulated, when in reality it was the US that did that? So we bring this right back around to Ukraine, and we see the position that Kiev is in today. And as we've seen for a while now, NATO has really been keeping Kiev on life support. And it's like they are well aware that Russia is fighting a war of attrition, that their goal is to pursue the collapse of Kiev's military altogether, right? It's not just to, gain territory. It is, no, to make it so that their military falls apart. NATO has to know that, right? It's very obvious. So why do you think it is that NATO is keeping Ukraine in this position? Is it because they just genuinely don't care about Ukraine and they want to keep Russia at war?
Well, that too. Do not forget, most of the Western elites are, and the question is not Russophobia. Russophobia is being afraid of Russians. No, it's just, hatred of Russians. It's visceral, and it's based on the cultural and racial, attitudes. So those people like this, crazy, person who, orderlies try to constrain, who speeds and tries to scratch you, whatever, and you just pull it back. That's who they are. And so they cannot fight the war. They are absolutely impotent. They always were, actually. And so when now it has been paraded with this, so what's left? They are cowards politically. They don't think they care about is basically their political power. They will sell their families, children, wives, mothers for that. And as a result, they will continue to do what essentially Russians are anticipating them to do, to support until there's no support left, which is happening right now. And on Sunday, you have the whole European chihuahuas, getting shaky, and they are militarily, industrially, absolutely impotent. And so what they're going to do? Okay, sure, continue to provide, these weapons to Ukraine. Russians will kill more of the Ukrainian men and now women and even children. Children being like 14, 16-year-olds, which are found on the front, which is like Hitler Jugend, Hitler Youth. That's what you have now. So Russians say, okay, if you won't continue, we can do it as long as we want, as you want. But the West cannot do this. And so as the result, they cannot turn around. They can't. Can you imagine what is going to be happening? And they lied, not that majority of Europeans don't like Russians, and they don't mind if Russia disappears tomorrow and Russians are going hungry or what have you. So it's not like, oh yeah, there are some poor European people who have been brainwashed. They have been brainwashed because they wanted to be brainwashed, at least majority of them. I'm not saying that there are no normal people there. There are, certainly. But the point is that in the end, it's centuries old, in fact, is millennium old, so nothing new here. And Russian proverb is very famous. Every 100 years, combined West goes to fight Russia. It gets its ass handed to it, turn around, licks its wounds, and until the next time. And this is what they do, but now, obviously, the paradigm change, technological paradigm change, everything changed. And so Europe is nothing more than, it's barren. It doesn't have really serious resources. It's completely dependent on Middle East. It was dependent on Russia, on the United States. And so they're pretending that they somehow superpower, which they are not. But Macron, because he thinks that these 4 nuclear powered submarines with strategic missiles of the French Navy, Marine Nationale, somehow matter, he pretends that he speaks for the whole Europe. But he is also shaking in his boots. And obviously, when you look at what happened, and can you imagine, keep in mind, just for the sake of the Iran-Israel issue, if Iran goes really pissed off, and they can go, they will not just close the Strait of Hormuz. They will blow all those oil facilities in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. And guess what? U.S. military can do nothing, but everybody saw what its air defense is. It's no air defense at all, practically, So, and once they do this, what happens to Europe? Now, well, I can tell you what happens to Europe. 25 euros per liter of gas. Let them go to those wonderful electric vehicles. Not that, of course, none of them ever studied physics, and they don't understand how. Macron thinks that you get electricity from the outlet socket, So, but that's what it is. But Europe is not one way or another. Now, when they see United States pulling back, United States is free to do it because it's superpower. It's privilege which is afforded to superpowers, and say, no, we cannot do this anymore. Europe, which was one of the major, drivers behind all this thing, guess what they are? They are in the bind. They are between the rock and the hard place. And Macron, being the coward that he is, and he calls Putin and discusses two things, Iran and Ukraine. So, and okay, and this is not to say Russians say, we've warned you. Didn't we tell you this, from the get-go? No, they evidently don't learn.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important point too, because it's crazy to me how the US has Europe in this place where it's like they act like it's their ally. In reality, it's their vassal states, but they don't care
Absolutely.
what happens to them, right? They are
No.
constantly throwing them under the bus. They're like, oh yeah, let's bomb Nord Stream, right? Oh yeah, it doesn't matter. We'll start a conflict in the Middle East where exactly as you're noting there, Europe would be directly impacted by it. So Macron picks up the phone, he calls Putin. Putin agrees to this phone call, right? And as you were noting there, you have this Kremlin statement where they say, hey, they had these two major topics. What's interesting to me here is that France has also taken part in not only giving plenty of lethal aid to Ukraine, what they're able to, but also giving them these long-range missiles, which we know that France has to be directly involved in firing these. It's not like they just send them to Kiev and then Kiev sends them off into Russia.
Yeah.
Now, maybe there's the Ukrainian in the room, but it's not much more involvement than that from Kiev's side. So France has Russian blood on their hands, and yet Macron is picking up the phone and he's calling Putin. How do you view that call, and how do you think that Putin views it? Is he just kind of taking it for the entertainment of it to kind of see what Macron has to say?
France is existential enemy of Russia and Russian people. And one of the reasons he also called, and if you followed, and actually I made a video specifically about it a couple of months ago, there were calls from the inside Russian, French government and former French officials who say, we are sending people, French people. Well, they did. And guess what? One of the reasons Macron calls is because Russians found out the center of the preparation of training meant by French near Odessa, and Mr. Iskander visited there. So there are no those French. And Russians will continue to kill French as long as it takes. And Macron wanted to send more French to Odessa. And with Mr. Putin, as even from transcript, he talks about general terms, which never change. Russians say there will be no ceasefire. There will be only one thing, addressing the root causes. But French will pretend that they somehow, independent in their actions, but they, in the same time, do not want to get killed. No, they all will get killed. All their officers, all their personnel who comes to Ukraine. And if they send Russia say, send all your army, we will kill it all. And again, militarily, they are impotent. And that's the thing. And you cannot, if you take a look at a year ago, Mr. Tolstoy, member of parliament and great-grandson of Leo Tolstoy, he speaks perfect French. And he was interviewed by this pathetic, bunch of the losers from the LCI, whatever the hell the name of this station, from major station in France. And these guys, they think they're so amazing, they're so shiny, that everybody is blinded by how great they are. When Tolstoy tells this dude, oh, are you going to kill us? He said, yeah, we're going to kill all of you if you send anybody, So they cannot even comprehend that they're pathetic. They're chihuahua. They're just, Russians going to kill them under the bench. And, that's how brainwashed the elites are. Remember, Lambrecht, Christine Lambrecht, I believe, Minister of Defense of Germany 2.5 years ago. Remember how she threatened Putin? She cannot be, and he wouldn't be able to shop at the Champs-Élysées in Paris anymore. And the whole Russia went into Homeric laughter that, oh my God, Cox, what a horrible, so that we cannot shop at Champs-Élysées and you overpriced junk you sell for the riffraff, So, and that's their level of awareness. You have imbeciles. You want to look at 360-degree Annalena Baerbock. Remember who she was? She's now in United Nations, So it's a recycle of cretins, all over the place. They are not self-aware. They are uncultured. They are not educated properly. And as a result, yeah. And Macron calls, and guess what? he will now go and parade himself in front of the same losers like he is from, United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, whatever. Look, I got to talk to Putin. Look at me. Cool dude. So while Putin did what he always does, he articulated the thing. But the most important thing, which shouldn't be lost in this conversation, in this translation, if you wish, as Mr. Fico, and then Mr. Orban, and then Mr. Lavrov, or Zakharova, I believe, stated, even before, in this period of time, before this Macron talk, they all were trying to contact Putin, all those European nations. And they said, we're not going to tell which ones, but we know they were trying to call. Even Scholz, before he left, he got the call to Putin. He repeated this stupid, idiotic, the demands Putin told him to basically go pound sand, but that was it. He did it for PR. And fact is, they are so petty, they are so pathetic. Those countries, those nations who do not understand that their time is up, their 500-year-old reign is over, that they look at this and they think, oh my God, we're so important. Let's call Putin. Oh yeah, look at me, I talked to Putin. This is how bad it all became. And now they are absolutely in panic because, well, they are paupers. They're beggars. That's what they are. And Europe will be poor. And the worst part for Europe, you know what? It's the historic shift in Russian attitudes towards Europeans. Russians don't care if Europe disappears tomorrow. The only thing they care about is to get the proper GRU and FSB special forces to save the treasures of Louvre and other galleries, and that's it. The rest of it can go to hell, if Europe disappears tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that Macron still has that attitude so many years in, right? Where it's not like we're in early 2022 and he's acting like, oh,
Paris is a dumpster. They are multicultural cloaca. France probably not going to last beyond 2050. Essentially, I'm on record. There's nothing really. It's an official term. Those are nations of cuckolds. Their men have been completely emasculated. So, and yeah, that's what they are. So they're done. It's over. And French people, they're over. There's no honor, integrity, courage left. Well, so what can I say? And I'm not saying that all of them like that, but they have enough, the core of the nation who behaves like this, that, yeah, you chose your fate. You are who you are. Live with that. You do not deserve respect, period. Simple as that.
And speaking of that fate, one of the things that I noticed at last week's NATO summit was that instead of the focus being largely on Ukraine, and we've all got to, send money to Ukraine, all of a sudden it's on quote unquote European security, and we've got to up defense spending. And we're watching as the US is once again throwing all of its European vassal states under the bus. I mean, like, hey, you guys spend the money, you guys go to war with Russia. Meanwhile, Russia has had all of this time to fight and train and prepare for a real war. But as you were noting, none of these European states are anywhere near that or have any idea what they're getting into. How do you think Russia is viewing this? Because on their end, they've agreed to talks. They've said, we want some sort of a lasting deal to end this war. But on the other hand, they're also aware that Europe is being conditioned for really a lasting war against Russia beyond just Ukraine. Not that they would necessarily be able to handle it, but to stay at war with Russia until the bitter end here.
The idea was always the same. You can go back to my blog, and even before the special military operation started, it was clear what was the plan. The condition those bunch of morons to brainwash them with the hatred of Russia, and as always, that's who they are. And then supply them with junk American weapons which do not work, which they suddenly cry, oh God, we produce junk, yeah. But the idea was they go war against Russia, in some form, trying to keep it not nuclear, although Russians explained, if it goes nuclear, United States is gone. There will be no United States. So, but the point is that an idea was to sell those weapons, supply those weapons to Europeans. It's an outdated idea by the bunch of the cretins from all those think tanks like RAND and whatever, bunch of nincompoops with political science degrees. And so they still believe that they know what war is, they understand what strategy is. They don't. they are incompetent, and most American generals are incompetent. And so suddenly this plan just unravels. So what's left? Let's still finish off Europe. Let them be poor, but not poor like third world poor, but near third world poor, which they will be, are becoming. They will be. And sell them our weapons, because they will not have the industrial capacity, which they don't, let alone what is called R&D. And when I explain, United States lost the arms race to Russia. And I mean, it lost by the gigantic margin. On some critical weapon systems, they are behind Russia not by years, by generation or two of weapons. Europe is even worse. And so just to give you an example, I constantly give this number. Do you know what combined Europe can produce now in terms of tanks in 1 year? 40 tanks. All of those Leopards and Leclercs, whatever, some of them are in storage, and actually you will not be able to reconservate them, so reactivate them, because they are just simply junk now. And so do you know how many tanks Russia produces in a year? Around 1,200. So that's in terms of air defense system, Europe doesn't even register there. Okay, it's not even funny. And then you have this Financial Times, which of course, as always, they downgraded quite a bit, but still they say, oh, they have 13,000 missiles. Well, Russia has more than that, and much more than that. But hey, at least So Russia produces combined West together with the United States in several times over. On other part, for example, on smart munitions, which are the high precision weapons, by order of magnitude. Oh, so they want to fight Russians? Okay, good luck.
Yeah, it's like you can't even keep up just providing it for Ukraine, let alone, I mean, exactly as you were saying, Russia is at war with the entire NATO alliance right now, and the entire NATO alliance hasn't even come close to being able to keep up, and yet they still keep doubling down. They still keep pursuing more and more war. And so going to some of the accomplishments that we've seen from Russia, I know we've seen really an increase in drone and missile attacks. I'm talking about hundreds on a near nightly basis. We've also seen the fact that the local governor in Lugansk announced that the Russian military has taken full control of the entirety of the Lugansk People's Republic. And it's interesting kind of comparing this to the way that the Western media reports it, because they want to frame it as some sort of Russian summer offensive to convince you that anything that Russia is accomplishing right now, it's just part of some short-term offensive, versus looking at the overall war of attrition and what this really means for Kiev. So how do you see the current state of the war right now and kind of the momentum that we are seeing from Russia?
Well, it's all about, and I was on record for years now, it's all about annihilation of the personnel. Simple as that. Denazification. If famous Stalin's, which applies today fully, if the enemy doesn't surrender, kill him. And if they don't surrender, if this nation, so-called, of Ukraine cannot deal with the situation internally, so Russians will continue to kill their troops until there are none left. And when you begin to give the actual kill ratios, many people say, oh, no, that cannot be. Oh, yes, that can be. But again, it's media in the West is pathetic. It's a garbage, essentially. It's a dumpster. Anybody, and including the so-called experts, though, oh my God, never in my life did I see the so-called expert community being so dumb and so ineffective. But the point is, the kill ratios on some sectors reach out 1 to 20, and even the exchange of the bodies recently, it's a high correlation that showed that probably even more in some sectors. So it's a massacre. But what can I say? If they want to go and die, and they're sure, I mean, what can I say? You cannot save a patient. You cannot save alcoholic or drug addict if he doesn't or she doesn't want to admit that they're sick. They are, if not, so they will kill themselves. And Russia is merely a tool. It's merely this brick wall against which they throw themselves until there's completely nothing left there. And It is what it is. Nothing could be changed. And yeah, that's why Macron called. Some people there still can calculate something, and they say, "Good Lord, we are running out of everything." And yeah, that's the idea, isn't it? Demilitarization, not of Ukraine. It was demilitarized. Fact is, it's a virtual nation. It lives strictly on Western handouts, and once it's removed, it's gone. It implodes and it disintegrates. That's the Russian, idea. But the point is, so the NATO was demilitarized, and they are panicking now because guess what? They are not good militarily. Strategists, look at the intellectual elite of the West. It's pathetic. They are dumb. Pardon my French, So that's what.
Yeah, it's very telling, the fact that these are the people picking this fight, and yet Russia's over here. They've had so many times of, hey, do you want to work out an agreement? Do you want to, work out a lasting end to this war? Knowing all the while that they are dealing with the side that is trying to trick them into another Minsk style deal to get them to stop making this progress on the battlefield. And yet the West isn't even smart enough to see the writing on the wall and to kind of realize, okay, maybe we should quit before we've lost everything. But of course, they don't really care about Ukraine. And if they did, then we know that we would not be here. But I do always appreciate you taking the time to join me to break down all of the latest and to give us some insight and a little bit of education here. Especially, I know there are a lot of military experts there that are not true experts. Andrei Martyanov, a veteran author and Russian military expert, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Bye-bye.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also check out Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.